Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This is the big day. Dun, 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 dun. Hey! Welcome to our worship service at Central Unitarian Church. Aw. My name is Susan Gempler, your worship associate for today. CUC is an inclusive community of all ages which embraces diversity in identity, expression, and spiritual belief. We gather together each Sunday in worship to find inspiration and hope and renewal among this community of like-hearted individuals. And I just want to comment, it's just so great to see so many people in the front row for... Wow. If you are visiting us in person, please be sure to say hello to one of our welcome hosts, which today is Joan Whalen and Andrea Davis. They can wave their hands. Okay. If you are visiting us online, please be sure to click the link that should be provided in the chat and sign our guest book by providing us just with your name and contact information. And we invite you to stay after service. Normally we have coffee here, but today we're having a special luncheon. So I want to make sure everybody's turned off their little electronic devices, or at least made them quiet. Okay. I have several announcements. Today we celebrate the close of a meaningful congregational year and warmly welcome back Reverend Andrée from her sabbatical. Please join us after the service for our annual end-of-year picnic luncheon. This year it's indoors at the Elk Lodge, which is just up the road at 523 Kinderkamak Road. And we'll gather at noon for some good food, some connection, and of course, the ever-present cake. All are welcome, and we'd love to see you there. Join Reverend Andrée and the Pastoral Care Committee this Wednesday, June 4th, for the final soup lunch before our summer break. And next week, don't forget, is CUC's annual congregational meeting right after service. Reverend Andrée will also be looking for some volunteers to speak at our summer services starting the last Sunday in June. She's going to be in the pulpit a bit more than usual this summer because she just came back, but she's still going to be looking for volunteers to speak. The theme and additional details will be shared in the coming June bulletin. And I know that she's going to speak today on what did I miss? And I'm going to tell you, she missed a lot. What did we miss? Well. And now let us formally begin our gathering, and please turn to a person near to you and offer them a very warm welcome.
One of my favorite pianist things.
I think I did, but
I used to remember his name. You know.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I am the Reverend Andrée Cornelia Mall Minister here at Central Unitarian Church, and I have no idea if you missed me, but man, did I miss you. I did. So I returned this morning to the CUC pulpit, rested, rejuvenated, and inspired by my precious time away. And my wife says, and don't tire out again too soon. Thank you, Max. I figured we're going to have running commentary during service. I also returned this morning to the CUC pulpit with pride. Pride because this congregation that, you were a bit nervous about this sabbatical period. We have successfully navigated these 5 months without your settled minister. So there's pride for that. But I'm also returning with pride because the sabbatical was a gift to me. And for that, I am really, really grateful. I think back to, I shared this story before I went on sabbatical, but I think back to the search team, and I think back to signing my contract with CUC, and Tom Lupfer saying to me, when we got to the section of my contract that talked about sabbatical, said, I want you to be here long enough to take this. And well, I've been here long enough to take this, and now I'm back. And I also come back with pride because today's the first day of Pride Month, being June 1st. So aligning with Pride Month, our theme for this month's services is freedom, and our opening words come from the Reverend Gretchen Haley and is titled, The Healing in Freedom. Freedom has a rhythm to it, a longing our bodies know without words, a movement away from everything small and scared, a waking up to possibility, healing backwards and forwards. Even now, we are beginning again, unafraid of this much mercy, tenderness, pleasure. We come to lean in, to learn the sound of liberation like the sound of our names, receiving and releasing. We come to be free, for more than ourselves, to call love the greatest liberty, to sing of loyalty, courage, and kindness, to remember we are all doing the best we can. Despair hasn't gotten us yet, nor overwhelm, which is a kind of miracle, surrounded as we are by this much beauty. Come, let us worship together. I invite you to rise and body your spirit for our first hymn, 151, I Wish I Knew How.
Please join me in saying our chalice lighting words, which are based on CUC's vision statement. We light this chalice to remind us of our dreams, to nourish our hearts, mind, and spirit, to work towards a better world for all, to embrace the whole of our human experience, to honor our past and our gifts of the present, to create a community where each of us might find meaning, transformation, and hope.
So does anybody know the origins of LGBTQ pride, why we celebrate it each June? Stonewall, right. Pride commemorates the Stonewall Rebellion in Greenwich Village that started in the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, and it lasted for 5 nights. And today I bring you the story of that rebellion. For the last year and a half, and especially during my sabbatical, I've been working on a biography of a trans activist named Sylvia Rivera, who was present at the Stonewall Rebellion. So this story is, in more than one way, remains close to my heart. And I think you can't really understand what happened that night in Stonewall without first understanding what life was like for people who were gay, lesbian, transgender, intersex, anybody that's part of what we now call the LGBTQIA+ community. We didn't have that language before 1969, and it's evolved since then. And if you were in any of these categories, likely you were doing what you could to keep it a secret. Gay and lesbian individuals, there was no protection around things like jobs, things like housing. If you were discovered to be gay, it was very easy to just fire you because you're gay. The government actually rooted out gay people in government positions and fired them because they were gay. Folks who were gender nonconforming had an even harder time. Those individuals probably couldn't even get a job and were being pushed out of any place in society. And for all of these individuals, harassment, violence, these were all real things that you had to live with. So sure, there were places, there were these meccas like Greenwich Village, which many called the gay ghetto, right? It was a place where you could kind of be yourself. And you could find some nightlife there in the 60s, right? There were bars that you could go to, clubs that you could go to. But these bars and clubs, they were more often than not owned by the mafia. So they could run these places and serve gay clientele because it was illegal to serve alcohol to someone who was gay. It was illegal for an individual to be out in public wearing clothes that didn't match their gender assigned at birth. You could actually get arrested if you weren't wearing at least 3 articles of clothing that matched your gender assigned at birth. And if they caught you and wanted to arrest you, how did they check you? They're going to strip search you, right? So these individuals were constantly facing harassment and violence. And in these mafia-run bars, you're talking about lots of exploitation happening there. You're talking about the police were, even though the police were being paid off, they were constantly raiding these bars anyway. So it became a constant situation where people would be in a bar, the lights would go on, oh, here's another raid, and the police come in, they take all the cash and the alcohol, they leave, they arrest anybody who doesn't have proper ID, they arrest anybody who's not wearing the right clothing, which made a lot of trans and gender nonconforming folks end up in jail. Not a great place to be, right? And so these were really oppressive times. But those bars and those spaces were, in a bit, a place to be free, right? And if you, the other thing that I should mention is beyond the police and the jails, the healthcare system was also a horrendous place for people in this community, right? People would end up in mental hospitals. Being gay was treated as a disease. Having gender dysphoria was considered a disease. Lots of really horrible medical practices were done against people to fix them. So you imagine a place like Stonewall. So here's you Stonewall, it's a mafia-run club, but it was a place to be free. It was one of the few places in Greenwich Village that had not just 1, but 2 dance floors. And they let you dance. Not all places would let people dance. So you're dancing, if you're gay, you're dancing with someone of the same gender as you. If you're gender nonconforming, you're in there kind of being yourself. And you could be in a space like that. They had a really good jukebox. So a lot of people say one of the reasons they love the Stonewall. But it was a hole in the wall. It was basically a room that was just painted black with this bar. There's some go-go dancers. There's good music. There's watered-down drinks. They didn't even wash. They had a big tub of dirty water. They just put the glasses in and took them out. And, you know, hepatitis C was, like, spread. Seriously, this is how grungy this place was. But it was a place to be yourself. So it's a Friday night, June 27th, 1969. Everybody's going out, doing their Friday night thing, having a lovely Friday evening. Judy Garland had recently died. People were sad about that. She'd had a tragic death of overdose. She was young. It was a hot night. It was the 80s, 90s, really hot night. The bar had actually already been raided. Stonewall had already been raided earlier that week. But here you are in the middle of the night. It was peak time. It was like 1 in the morning, right? So this is like peak club time. Everybody's having fun. The lights go on. And everybody's like, oh, here we go again. And so the police start coming in. And the police this time were led by an individual named Inspector Pine, who'd recently been in charge of the Morals Division. And what nobody knew that night is Inspector Pine, that night, instead of what usually happened, which is they shut down the bar, they padlock the door, they leave, everybody else disperses. Usually they'd come back 15 minutes later, the mafia had already cut the lock, brought back new alcohol, new money, and they're back running up to business within a half an hour. But Pine intended to shut down the Stonewall for good. He came in there that night with a plan to shut it down. But he'd done tons of these raids. The police he was with had done tons of these raids. They can do this with 6 people, even though the bar's packed. That's how they always do it, because everybody complies. Because that is the environment that had been created, the harsh environment that had been created. So they come in, they start asking everybody to line up. We're checking IDs. They've only got a couple officers that are with them. And of course, they then start taking anybody who is not wearing the proper clothing. They have to go get checked by policemen, and they're moving them off into another room. And some of those folks start grumbling. And even Inspector Pine's like, that's a little different. Usually they just comply with what's going on. And anybody who has ID, but of course everybody's like switching ID. I don't have an ID. Do you have like, I have a Bloomingdale's credit card with my name on it. That's good, I'll take that. So people are, kind of preparing to get out. People get outside. And on that night, another thing that happened that was different is instead of people dispersing, they hung around. If you've ever been down to that part in the village, the streets are really tight and angular, and right across the street from the Stonewall Bar is a little park called Sheridan Square Park. And in this park, there were a number of gay homeless youth that lived in that park, and they pretty much frequented the Stonewall, so they were kind of part of this scene here. And as people were coming out of the Stonewall that night, instead of going and disappearing and planning to come back 15 minutes later, they lingered. And they were watching their friends in the bar that were coming out. And as more and more people come out, the crowd outside starts growing. And because this is unusual, people are in other bars and other places coming by, oh, what's going on? So this crowd starts growing, right? And as people are coming out of the bar, they're getting released, they're hamming it up a little bit, like, hey, I'm here, and doing little bows, and everybody's clapping. But the police, of course, are taking this seriously. And the crowd starts to witness the police harassing some of the folks that they're bringing. There's a paddy wagon comes up, and they're, putting some folks into it, some of the bar employees, but also a trans woman's coming along and going into the paddy wagon. She's not moving fast enough, so an officer pushes her. She turns around, clubs him, and he just smacks her back with his billy club. And the crowd is not liking this. So they start throwing some coins. Hey, you want your payoff? Here's your payoff. We're going to throw coins at you. And the cops, of course, don't like this. And they keep piling more people in. And the crowd is witnessing more of this violence against them. And people who were there said you could kind of feel the energy in a way that you'd never felt it before, that something was happening, something was different, because we weren't complying. And so word starts going out to more and more bars. This crowd outside the Stonewall grows to about 1,000 people. And the cops, many of who are inside, are kind of getting nervous. Like, what's happening? And from the coins, they start becoming bottles. Some folks find a construction site nearby and they pick up some bricks and they're throwing bricks at the building. One of the cops gets hit right near the eye. So Inspector Pine says to everybody, come back into the bar. We're going to stay in the bar. We're trying to get reinforcement. We sent the paddy wagon back with a bunch of people. It's supposed to come back. But meanwhile, the crowd starts growing. The police have now barricaded themselves inside. The phone lines aren't working for some reason. We still don't know historically who cut the phone lines, but somebody did. And they've got a radio. And so every time they use the radio and they say, hey, we want to call for backup, on the radio they hear, disregard that order. So somebody is on their frequency and messing up their communication. So anyway, the police are barricaded in the bar, and they don't have any backup. And meanwhile, this crowd is growing, and for the first time in their lives, they've got the police cornered. The police, you have to remember, are in this situation, they are the symbol of all the brutality, all the hatred, and all the oppression that these individuals gathering out here feel and experience day in and day out. And the anger just starts pouring out. They're throwing more rocks. They're throwing more stones. A couple of people manage to take a parking meter and pull it out from the ground. They're using it as a battering ram to try to knock open the doors. Some folks take some lighter fluid and put it in some Coke bottles, and they're throwing Molotov cocktails at the windows, trying to light the place on fire, and the police are using fire extinguishers to douse the flames. You know, this is getting really scary. And finally, the tactical police force finally show up, so the police are able to leave the bar, and the tactical police force are coming on in with all their riot gear, and they think they're gonna clean the streets. Well, now you've got this huge, angry crowd who's throwing things. And the tactical police do what they normally do. They line up in a line, and they're forming a wedge, and they're going down the street. Well, how many of you have been down to Greenwich Village? What are the streets like down there? They're all kind of all over the place, right? So they would do their regular tactical police force thing and go down the street, and all the queer folks in the street would do was go right around the corner, because they're like little triangular streets, and come out behind them. And you had a bunch of, especially the kids in the park, and a lot of the gender non-conforming folks, they're the ones that were taunting the police the most. They're forming chorus lines and kicking their legs and singing, "We are the Stonewall Girls," and they're singing at them, and the police force just keeps going, and then they go around the block and come behind them. So it's utter madness. And this continues all night long, till late into the evening hours. You know, of course, there is violence. There is bloodshed. There's people getting hit. There's people getting smacked. There's people getting dragged away to jail. But people keep it up for quite a while. And then finally, in the early morning hours, the crowds disperse. The police think it's okay. Next night, crowds from all around the village are gathering. Did you hear what happened here last night? Did you hear what happened? Yeah, I heard what happened. We had the police barricaded in the Stonewall. This is fantastic. And so the police send in the tactical police force again, because they see all these crowds coming, and violence ensues again. But there's a difference this night. Because this night, as you look around and you see crowds, you see people holding hands. You see people not afraid to be out in public. You see people finding this spark of, hey, what's wrong is not me. What's wrong is the way that society has been treating me. And what's most important about this, Stonewall actually wasn't the first time that this type of thing happened. There's a number of these types of riots that happened in the 50s and 60s in LA and Philadelphia and San Francisco. But the big thing that made Stonewall different was partially the size, and partially that being in the middle of Greenwich Village in the late 60s, you have all these people that were involved in this. They were involved in the war protest. They're involved in the civil rights movement. They're involved in the growing women's movement. These people were involved in all these other radical movements, and they're saying, wait a minute, it's our time. And so they start organizing. And so this night of riots sparked what became the first called the Gay Liberation Movement, but is now the LGBTQIA+ movement that we know of today. And I just want to quote Sylvia Rivera, who I wrote about, talking about what it felt like that night. She said, "The movement was born that night, and we knew we had done something that everybody in the whole world would know about when the news came out. They would know that gay people stood up and fought, and that would make everybody else stand up and fight. And even the next day, there was an immediate change amongst the community, letting themselves be visible to the world. You saw lovers walking down the street holding hands and kissing in public. I mean, there were things that you could do before, but they had to be done late at night when no one else could see you. But in broad daylight, this was beautiful to see. It was beautiful to see people not hiding. And that's when we knew that nothing was ever going to be the same again, at that time or any time in the future." So as this movement grew, they knew when June of 1970 came around, the year later, that they needed to commemorate this day. And they organized something called the Christopher Street Liberation March. And first it was just a handful, maybe 50 to 100 people who were kind of scared, who were going to march from Stonewall all the way up to Central Park to Sheep's Meadow. And as they continued their march, one marcher described it as it was the fastest march I'd ever seen because everybody was really nervous. People started coming and joining them. And by the time they reached the park, they were thousands strong. And that was the first Pride March. That's what has now evolved to be the Pride Parade that is always held the last Sunday in June in New York City, and now happens all around the world, and now is a whole month of celebration. So on this Pride Month, let us remember those people that came before us, no matter what our identity, and remember the courage they had and the conviction they had to be themselves and to let others be themselves too, because it truly has changed the world.
We are not alone. Our lives are built on shared commitments, giving and receiving together. Our congregation serves as a place where we intentionally practice the shared living, interdependence in a culture that overemphasizes independence. One of the ways we practice our interdependence is through our congregational finances, which depend on the generous contributions of members and friends. We pause each week to recognize this particular form of sharing, each of us giving what we can to support the mission and the vision of Central Unitarian Church. Your financial contribution helps each and every one of us to grow and to serve, and most importantly, to live lives centered on love. Our offering will now be gratefully received. Thank you, Matt. Please join me in saying our dedication words based on CUC's mission statement. We dedicate these gifts in service of our mission to welcome all into a home of spiritual diversity that challenges us to become our best selves, to minister to one another in love, and to serve the greater community.
Now we enter into a time of meditation, taking a moment to share together the joys and sorrows of this community, which is something that we do together every week. It's a way that we care for each other. I have a few written joys and sorrows that were submitted ahead of time that I'm going to read here. I'll then read out loud any joys or sorrows that are submitted online. So if you are online, please take a moment to type anything you want to share in there now. And then I will open it up to the room and invite you to share out loud the name of anybody else you're holding in your heart this morning. But let's first prepare ourselves. Let's take a deep breath in and a breath out together. As we share together the joys and sorrows of this community for Sunday, June 1st, 2025. And now I invite you to share out loud the name of anybody else you're holding in your heart this morning. May all these joys and all these sorrows, both spoken and unspoken, be held together with love in our hearts as we enter into a moment of silence. Spirit of love, we gather today in celebration of pride, celebration of the reuniting between minister and congregation, celebration of the beginning of summer months and all the milestones which come with it, including graduations, vacations, more time outdoors. Yet, we also gather with our heads spinning at so many of our values that are under attack, so much pain and heartache, so much violence, hatred, and unchecked power. Under the weight of all this, may we continue to live our lives bounded by the values we espouse. May we enact the world we wish to live in, even if we're not living in it now. Even if the gap between our present reality and our dream of the future continues to grow into a giant chasm. May we continue to live our lives centered in love. May we find strength and inspiration in the lives of those who have faced such adversity before us, for they have traveled similar terrain. May these ancestors teach us how to struggle, how to survive, and how to thrive. May such wisdom, guidance, and living nourish us, so we may feel in our very bodies, may we feel the renewed energy and joy for all we face together. Amen. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be. I invite you to remain seated for our next hymn, Circle Round for Freedom, 155.
Circle round, release.
Somebody's having a good time. Our reading today is called In Praise of Limits, written by Reverend Sean Parker Dennison. A river without banks isn't a river, but a marsh. A swamp enroaching, rotting the roots of the tree where songbirds once welcomed the dawn. A pasture without end, missing fences, is not a space of safety from storms or predators or weather, too much for any dog or shepherd to guard. A person without skin may be a ghost or a pile of bones, unguarded from dirt and disease, unable to touch or be touched, to hold or be held without pain. Life without limit and unfettered festers into something that does more harm than good, takes more than can be given, becomes death's instrument. Freedom that cannot perceive that others must also be free is not freedom at all, but entitlement, greedy and overstuffed, the libertine impostor of liberty. Here ends the reading.
Someone commented on my title for my sermon today. I forget who it was when I came in and said, wow, what did I miss? You missed a lot. We're going to be here a long time. So maybe this is just a little taste, an intention to start us on our path forward back together. For the last 5 months, I have unplugged from my regular life, driven by my work calendar. I've taken advantage of spending large stretches of time untethered by my phone and the internet. I even spent a week in a cabin in the woods in Vermont, alone, going sometimes full days without seeing another human being, reading, meditating, hiking, praying, lighting candles, playing my guitar, writing. My sabbatical project brought me into numerous libraries and archives, as well as the living room of individuals who knew my subject, Sylvia Rivera. I've had the honor of interviewing quite a number of LGBTQ activists from the 60s through the 90s, including a few of our elders who were at Stonewall that fateful night in June 1969. I think I noticed pretty quickly, and I knew this going in, but whenever you're knocked out of your regular routine, you begin to notice things that you're missing, behaviors or experiences that have slowly crept out of your life. And you might not even have noticed that they were gone until you stop to look and go, oh yeah, I liked doing these things and they've gone away. I enjoyed sleeping in on Sundays, for example. More hikes and walks than usual, a lot of reading, long stretches of sustained writing, attending worship services of other denominations where there were no expectations of me whatsoever, connecting deeply with loved ones and new friends, being present with those most dear to me, and being present to the spirits that surround me, this living world that we're in. Again, I get that when I'm working, but I really got to just bathe in that for 5 months. But over the first few months, especially after the inauguration in January, I began to miss the things that I let go of in order to be on sabbatical. I miss this community. I missed you deeply, especially as the months went by. Max can attest to it. I was talking. She's like, you're not back at work yet. But I missed you. I was asking questions. How are you doing? How are you experiencing the turbulence in this world? How are you feeling about it? How are you caring for each other? I knew you were caring for each other, but I still wanted to know what was happening. And how were you processing what's been happening in our world? On the one hand, it felt really good to remove myself from the process of helping others find meaning in our world. And I needed to let go of that in order to recharge. Because my first congregational internship was 2 months before Trump was first elected president in 2016. So I'd spent 9 years in congregational ministry, including through a pandemic, helping others make meaning out of an ever-changing world. I mean, if I hear the phrase, we're living in unprecedented times, one more time in my ministry, I'm doing my best not to say it myself, because we've just been saying it for almost 10 years. I needed a break. And at the same time, ministry is my calling. Helping others make meaning is part of what my heart longs to do. So witnessing all the atrocities over the last 5 months and not actively engaging in them with you through this ministry left me feeling a little bit helpless and useless. I missed my calling, and I missed being here with you every Sunday. None of this is to say I kept my head buried in the sand, because like all of you, I kept reading the news and listening to the news and talking about the news. I missed the days before my wife and I referred to reading the news as doom scrolling, which I'm sure a lot of you refer to it as well. And I missed finding any sense of joy in the headlines. I missed the freedom of not feeling under constant attack as a trans person. And I know that there are other identities also feeling under constant attack again these days. Luckily, as part of my outlet, I had my sabbatical project. And so because of that, I've been carefully studying LGBTQ plus history from the 1950s to the present. And a few things struck me doing this, and these aren't necessarily new revelations, but they're things that I was reminded of as I was doing this work. We think about history as happening in fits and starts. We think about it as history happening at major historical events. And at times, it does with those big historical events, like the Stonewall Uprising, like many of the events that we study in history class. But mostly, history happens bit by bit over long stretches of time. And it's important that we pay attention to both those types of change, large and small. It's kind of like erosion on a beach, right? It's happening inch by inch. There may be a big event like a storm, which takes a bunch away, or a cliff finally gives away, or part of a dune finally gives away. But most of it's happening bit by bit. And you might not even notice. Maybe you go away from your favorite spot and you haven't been there in 10 years, and you go back and you go, wow, what happened to this beautiful beach that used to be here? Right? It's when you miss it and turn around that you realize that something is gone. And that type of change that happens in both fits and starts and incrementally, that can be bad or it can be good. It's kind of neutral, but we need to pay attention to both. I interviewed a gay man for my book who was part of the first post-Stonewall activist organization called Gay Liberation Front. So he wasn't at Stonewall, but he was in the Gay Liberation Front, which organized just a few weeks after the Stonewall Uprising in 1969. And he shared with me all the various actions and tasks that he was part of in order to be part of this organization that they lovingly called GLF. And unfortunately, that organization only lasted a few years, but its members went on to a variety of vital projects and organizations which brought about the rights that we LGBTQ people today have and appreciate today. But back in 1969, when there were just a few hundred people with a taste of liberation and a dream for a future, they hoped that they were going to change the world, but they didn't know. And this gay man that I interviewed shared these experiences with me, and then talked with me about attending the 50th Pride celebration here in New York in 2019. And he said, I was there with my fellow GLFers who are still alive, and we looked out at this crowd of millions. And even as he was telling me, there were tears in his eyes. He said, and I looked out at that huge crowd and I said, wow, look what we did. Look what we did. You know, he was part of just those little incremental changes. And then 50 years, he could stop and look back and see this huge movement that he was part of creating, and he could say, look what we did. These are big and small changes occurring one at a time over a period of decades. Now that's an example of a healing kind of change over decades. An example of a more harmful kind of change can be found in the years when we faced AIDS. In this country, almost 500,000 people died of AIDS between its discovery in 1981 and 2000, with the peak of deaths occurring in the late 80s and early 90s, as our country and the medical establishment, for most of the time, moved at a glacial pace or just simply did nothing. And I don't know how much of you remember what the rhetoric was at that time. People were talking about branding folks who were positive with HIV with tattoos. People were talking about calling for concentration camps to be made, similar to what we hear today with the anti-trans rhetoric. This was coming from elected officials saying these types of things. And at that time, while all this stuff is being said, one life at a time, communities were being devastated. We lost generations of LGBTQ plus individuals, a generation to that pandemic. And yes, it was a pandemic. And although AIDS is no longer a death sentence for those who have access to treatment, AIDS still exists throughout the world, including in many areas that until recently received US aid. And we still have generations of AIDS survivors, some of who that I talk to, who are carrying the same trauma. I realize as I talk to them, they're carrying the same trauma as a war vet. Because too many people sat as they watched their entire friend group die, and nobody seemed to care. And for some reason, like this last pandemic that we had, we've just mostly stopped talking about it. And we haven't taken time to process the trauma and the steps that need to be taken to heal from it, and so we just leave those survivors. They found ways to care for themselves and care for each other, but as a country, we've just left it. And make no mistake, the hatred embedded in the neglect of combating AIDS is the same hatred carried by the police who committed violence against those individuals at Stonewall, and it's the same hatred that fuels the anti-trans laws that we see today. It's not like the tide has suddenly turned against us. The hate we face today is not new. It's built on the hatred of yesterday, and it was there all along. And if you think it's new, it's just because you missed it because it didn't affect you, or you just became adjusted to its presence, and you didn't notice for a while that it was still there. But while that thread of hatred runs through that history, the thread of other possibilities also exist in parallel to those threads. And those threads of other possibilities, they haven't been frayed, although people are working really hard to cut them. We've always been fighting back against the tide. We're just experiencing larger waves that have been building up from smaller ones that have existed all along throughout history. And those smaller waves have been gathering and organizing to overwhelm us. No, what we're experiencing today is not new. It was built on yesterday. Last week in the New York Times, one of the opinion writers, M. Gesson, wrote a piece that some of you may have seen. It was called "Beware, We're Entering a New Phase in the Trump Era." M. Gesson has reported on many wars and has lived through and reported on Russia when Vladimir Putin took and consolidated power there. They witnessed the shock that people experienced in Russia as new authoritarian actions occurred, and then the adjustment period that followed as such actions became familiar and routine. And they write, "The United States in the last 4 months has felt like an unremitting series of shocks. Executive orders, gutting civil rights and constitutional protections, a man with a chainsaw trying to gut the federal government, deliberately brutal deportations, people snatched off the street and disappeared in unmarked cars, legal attacks on universities and law firms." And they go on to say, "Unlike the Russian autocratic breakthrough, or for that matter, the Hungarian one, which apparently provided some of the current administration's playbook, the transformation of the American government and society hasn't been spread out over decades or even years. It's everything, everywhere, all at once." And they conclude, "In this country, too, fewer and fewer things surprise us. Once you've absorbed the shock of deportations to El Salvador, plans to deport people to South Sudan aren't that remarkable. Once you've wrapped your mind around the Trump administration's revoking the legal status of individual international students, a blanket ban on international enrollment at Harvard isn't really that unexpected. Once you've realized that the administration is intent on driving thousands of trans people out of the U.S. military, a ban on Medicaid coverage for gender-affirming care, which could have devastating effects on hundreds of thousands, just becomes more of the same. As in a country at war, reports of human tragedy and extreme cruelty have become routine, not news." So as authoritarian leaders increase and consolidate their power, breaking down limits previously placed on their position, normalization becomes a key component of their escalating path forward. So many shocking events at once is done on purpose because it leads to that normalization. And collectively, we run the danger of no longer being shocked. And then that runs the risk of bringing about acquiescence and complacence. May we all be aware of the day we miss being shocked by such acts of cruelty, hatred, and violence. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of similar dangers. He warned us to remain maladjusted. He said, "There's some things in our society and some things in our world which I'm proud to be maladjusted. I never intend to adjust myself to racial segregation and discrimination. I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions which will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few." And I would add, I never intend to adjust myself to xenophobia. I never intend to adjust myself to homophobia. I never intend to adjust myself to transphobia. I never intend to adjust myself to misogyny. I never intend to adjust myself to anti-Semitism being used as an excuse to violate other people's rights. I never intend to adjust myself to a world of deep polarization, ripping apart families and communities. I never intend to adjust myself to unlimited power in any form. As Reverend Sean Parker Dennison writes in our reading, "Life without limit is unfettered, festers into something that does more harm than good, takes more than can be given, and becomes death's instrument." There's a painful reality buried within LGBTQ history that we cannot ignore at Pride, especially in our current environment. The rebellion at Stonewall, as I shared earlier, included many individuals of a variety of identities. Yet one of the key groups participating in that rebellion, and some argue the group that helped spark the rebellion, were the individuals which today we would call trans or gender nonconforming. They had nothing to lose. Most of them did not have jobs. Many of them didn't even have homes. They were fighting for what little they had. And after all, they were facing the harshest oppression in society where they often stood out. And when that new organization, the Gay Liberation Front, formed just a few weeks later, those individuals took part. And the GLF created this broad revolutionary view of liberation for all, not just a few. But as the liberation movement continued to develop, trans and gender nonconforming individuals were deliberately pushed out. They couldn't make an argument for how we fit into society. It was easy to say gay and lesbian people are just like you. But somebody who's supposed to be a man and is too effeminate, somebody who's supposed to be a woman and is too butch, these folks didn't fit into society, and they got shoved aside. So as we gained more and more rights for housing protections, for job protections, deliberately, those who were gender nonconforming were kept out. And then the AIDS crisis happened, and our focus in our community was there. And this all left trans individuals to work on our own to gain our rights, not really gaining a foothold until the late 90s and early 2000s. Finally, we began educating the medical community on how to support us, and we gained further visibility in the media and society. And finally, with Obergefell and Hodges, the Supreme Court ruling in June 2015 that gave us equal marriage, which was just 10 years ago. Finally, when that happened, trans folks finally wrestled our way into the spotlight and began to gain our own rights. We finally got out at housing and job discrimination laws, which passed decades earlier to protect trans or gay and lesbian individuals. There's a lot of talk you hear right now about trans individuals being new or being a social contagion. We're not new. We've been here all along, and we've had to claw and fight our way for every single one of the rights that we have. Like my own Dutch ancestors who built dikes to hold back the tide and gain new ground, we built what we were finally able to gain, our own rights. And those who claim we are new, who claim we are an unnatural fad, aim to destroy what we have slowly built with our blood, our bodies, and our tears over the decades. But we know that that this claim to the land that belongs to us, we know this land that belongs to us, and we're not going to easily let go of it. We're not going away. And we're going to remain maladjusted to the cruelty that seeks to destroy us. So as I think about all these things from my sabbatical that I was missing, either in my life or missing in history, I remember that whenever you're knocked out of your regular routine, you begin to notice things that you've been missing. Those behaviors and experiences, like I said earlier, that slowly crept out of your life and that you may not even notice were gone. My hope is that we remain shocked, that we remain attuned to the dangers of unlimited power anywhere. May we not wake up one morning finding us missing our freedom. Too many of us have already done so. It has already taken too long for many of us to gain broad awareness of what we've been missing. More will be lost if we don't remain maladjusted. May we remain proud of our maladjustment, and together may we turn back the tide.
Please join me in saying our chalice extinguishing words based on CUC's covenant. We extinguish this chalice flame, but not our promise to each other, to act with grace, to hold each other in love, to serve the community and our world. This promise of the heart serves as a reminder of how we live together. May it bring joy to our collective lives. Now let us sing together the closing hymn, number 1020. It's in the small book.
Where we are going, and we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. We know, and the road will be muddy and rough. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we Heaven knows where we are going. We know we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we We're going to have to work on that one again. If it wasn't already quarter till, I'd make us sing it again. I miss the music. Pay attention to what you are missing. Remain maladjusted. Remain proud of your maladjustment. Together, and only together, may we turn back the tide. Amen. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Susan. Thank you to Phil in our back room. Thank you to all of you.